Hey, Claire Fork, 8th grade. Welcome to Mr. M's history classroom studio. Got Mona Lisa up here and got a few other items and got a shell of a crab up here somewhere. There he is from Key West, Florida. But anyways, I just thought I'd make a few videos this week trying to explain some things that are going to be on both Friday's quiz and your writing assignment. I'm glad to have you guys back in a classroom, sort of. Um, I don't know if you're like me, you're kind of climbing the walls a little bit. Weather hasn't been the greatest. Some of you probably had birthdays, during this shutdown. I had a birthday too. My daughter sent me this cup. I don't know if you guys can see it. Uh, so yeah, I had a birthday too. I thought this was kind of a cool cup, making America great since 1963. But anyways, so you've been doing a lot of homework. I don't know if it's all made sense because we haven't really had any discussions, but this all leads to the Civil War. And so we're going to be closing out the year talking about the Civil War and the aftermath of the Civil War. But a lot of this has to do with issues that started way before the 1850s. It's just the 1850s is where we see it really kind of come to a head and ends with the election of 1860, and then we get the Civil War. I'm going to be referencing some PowerPoints and presentations that I'm going to share with you guys on Google Classroom. So you might want to go back and look at those. So make sure you're looking at those. But a lot of this goes back to something we had talked about much earlier, and that was the idea of the rise of what's called sectionalism. Sectionalism is when different parts of your country develop differently, and over time you start to have more loyalty to that part of the country rather than the good of the whole. Now, it can actually be about three different things. It could be economically, part of a country develops differently. It could be politically. In other words, different political parties are going to serve different parts of the country. And then the last thing it could be is culturally, how people live. It could be very different from one part of a country to the other. The foods, the music, the customs, how people speak. All of those things can lead to what we call sectionalism. Now, if you have all three of those and they get extreme, that is not good for a country. And that's actually what we saw in the United States. It started way back in the fall when we were talking about how New England, the middle, and the southern colonies started to develop. But it really intensified, particularly after the American Revolution, leading into things like 1794, the cotton gin's invented. And so we see this new demand for cotton. The Industrial Revolution takes place in the North, but not in the South. And so we start to see the two parts of the country start to divide, to separate themselves. So make sure you take a look at those notes on that. One of the biggest places that it starts is actually after the War of 1812. So you're going to, when you go through those slides, look very carefully at something called the Missouri Compromise of 1820. A lot of this is going to get into as the country expands. The question is, do we have slavery or don't we in the new territories west of the Mississippi River? So it actually started to pop up the minute Jefferson bought Louisiana from France in 1803. So we start to get this question of, well, what about the lands to the west? What about to the west? Missouri Compromise of 1820 is during that time that we called the era of good feelings during James Monroe's presidency. And the real question gets to be, will Missouri come in as a slave state or a free state? At that time, there were 11 free and 11 slave states. And particularly, this would tip the balance in the Senate. Remember, the Senate is always the place we need to look at. It's the place where politics really balances out between big states and little states. Well, we talked about that way back when we were talking about the Constitution. So Missouri wanted to come in as a slave state. Northerners increasingly were starting to get concerned with the issue of slavery. They didn't really start thinking about it too much, but they were starting to think about it some. And so the real question got to be, well, can Missouri come in as a slave state? Henry Clay from Kentucky, the great compromiser, came up with a compromise. Now you can look at that map that's on that presentation. What he basically said was, well, Missouri wants to come in as a slave state. Let's let them come in as a slave state. But let's also set up a precedent for down the road. So they drew a line at the bottom of Missouri and said, okay, everything north of that can come in as a free state if they want. Everything south of that can come in as a slave state if they want to. In other words, we'll leave it up to those territories north and south of those lines. It also brought in the state of Maine at that time. Maine was part of Massachusetts originally. They brought it in as a free state. And so what did that do in the Senate? Well, it kept the balance, 12 and 12. And what we see all the way up until right around 1850, 1848, at the end of the Mexican War, is if you had a slave state come in, usually you had a free state come in. And they just went back and forth, keeping the balance. And in the Senate generally stayed balanced between free and slave states. And that kind of kept the peace, at least from 1820 up until about 1850. Now, I'm going to go over most of this piece by piece in later videos. I don't want to make these videos too long. But look over your notes. Look over the notes that I provide. And you guys will be doing a quiz and a writing assignment on one particular item in the 1850s. I want you to explain a little further. And you'll get to choose on that. All right, so till the next video, I don't know if I'll change my studio. I kind of like my little studio here. But until the next video, you guys can email me, question me. You guys can always use remind messaging. Make sure you guys are talking also to your other teachers as well. We're trying to put some closure on this school year. So you guys need to kind of make sure you're communicating well, especially when it comes to your grades. Anyways, hey, we'll see you guys later. Bye.